Just indulge me standing here talking to you for a moment. I want to say thank you for all you do. We have reached a literal and a figurative, I'll say, a reflection point. For we have looked back to the 1960s, 60 years back. Some might argue it's an inflection point, a watershed moment. But I argue a reflection point where we're looking back at all that you have done. But I want to challenge us to still yet look forward to all that needs to be done. Amen. There are so many people who are following in your footsteps, foot soldiers. And so often in this world where I have an 11-year-old, actually technically speaking, I have a 9-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 20-year-old to be exact. And they all have different ideas about what values are. Of course, I still pastor a church in Florence, Alabama, so I make a 5-hour round trip every time I go preach on Sunday morning. Wow. We still all go to church together, even as my son is in college there, but we all have different values. We love God, but we get our news from different sources. We don't all watch CNN or MSNBC or any of the others, Fox News or other cable news outlets. Sometimes they get their information from TikTok. Sometimes they're educated by social media giants, and their perspective and lenses of the world aren't the same as ours. Obviously, you can see there's some empty pews even in the house tonight, when this should be certainly a service that is packed out. I don't say that as an insult, I just say we have a challenge ahead of us. Because we know why you marched, why you stepped out, why you are foot soldiers. But there are some who still don't understand the journey. Right. Years ago, I remember talking to kids who are, as I said earlier, are already in college, and one now a rising senior, getting letters from Yale and Duke and Harvard to come be a part of that journey. But yet I'm reminding them, as I did back then, the world may look awesome from your lens and from your perspective, but there's some bumps and some struggles. And we have to learn to work together. As white, as black, as young, as old, as Democrats, as Republicans, as independents, no matter who we are, from Birmingham, from Hoover, from Mountain Brook, from Selma, from Montgomery, we have to learn to work together. We've been too divided in silos. And so I didn't come to preach to you tonight. You are so lucky there's not the Hammond organ fired up and my wife is not up there. Otherwise, by now I might be in the key of C or Z. And tuning up so we can go home. But I do want to say thank you again for helping to make our nation and our world a better place. I would not be able to do what I do or do what I've already done had it not been for your work, what you've done. You really stood up and you stepped out. And if I could be truthful with you, you showed out as well. You showed out. You showed out. You showed out stepping for freedom, stepping for justice. You stepped out for the betterment of not only one group of people, but all people for that matter. You worked through organizations like ACMHR, NAACP, and SCLC, and all of the church buildings that are listed in this program tonight. You've worked through these entities to make sure that you are able to see not only the dream that King shared with each and every one of you, but that it was realized in some of our lives even on today. Even today, you continue to keep the legacy of Dr. King and the civil rights movement alive as you are still here, still soldiers who won't give up the fight. So one more time, thank you so much. I would tell them I won't be long, Pastor Johnson, but they don't believe the preachers anymore. So I won't do that to them tonight, but I'll go a little further and say thank you for moving your feet and putting your necks on the line. For some 40 and 50 and even 60 years, many of you have been on this journey, and you've decided that you don't want to sit at the back of the bus. And frankly, in 2023, you're tired of being backed over by the bus. You keep putting your foot forward. Thank you so much. You have marched from Birmingham to Washington, D.C., to Montgomery, to Selma. You've marched across bridges. You've marched hundreds of miles. Thank you so much. You stood in sacred places like this one, and even other holy places down the street, like 16th Street Baptist, where the ultimate sacrifices of 4 young ladies and injuries from 22 of you, or 22 others that were sustained across the way as they were in that church. You know, in fact, that that is still an assault on civil rights today, and that because of that, we can't give up. The fight must continue. And I know the program argues, or at least points out, that we want to know why the fight must continue, but being at least allegedly that academician that Brother Jackson says I'm supposed to be, for the folks in the church, supposed to be, I have to stop and tell us at least a plan how I believe we can make that fight move forward and not go backwards. Thank you, Metropolitan Zion AME Church, for being not only a historic church, but one of those places that has been active in the fight. Thank you so much for all of you other church members in different churches, different pastors, different congregations who continue to fight. I was born and raised in Florence, South Carolina. Went to the University of South Carolina, not Alabama, not Auburn, not UNA where my son is. But in South Carolina, it wasn't that the journey, or at least the fight, stopped here in Alabama, but we saw, even in the sweltering heat of South Carolina, injustices also. In recent years, we had Mother Emanuel to be attacked while people were gathering, even in a place like this one. And still yet, we sometimes wonder why the fight must go on. The assaults on civil rights, like the one that took the lives earlier of those that I mentioned, the 4 young ladies, and I mentioned those of you who may have been part of the ones that were injured that day on September 15th, 1963, know that you have to keep fighting. This journey is not over. And I want to tell you today, as I go forward and prepare to sit down, that we have some things that we can do to make sure that we move our state and our nation forward. And the 3 that I want to roll out for you are in this order. First of all, we have to put humanity over identity. Amen. I've heard the First Lady, the former First Lady Obama, say aim high. All right. And I know that's spelled a totally different way, but I'm telling you to aim high tonight. H-I, put humanities over identity. Then I want to talk to you, because I spend a lot of time in the classroom talking about becoming not transactional leaders, but transformational leaders. I want to talk to you about moving towards transformational values. I said my family and friends have different values. And lastly, I want to quickly talk to you about progress we make as a people. And I know we have local elected officials and state officials in the House, but I want to talk about the progress we make as a people, not waiting on government to do it for us. Can I get an amen, somebody? While these ideas may seem more philosophical than pragmatic, it may surprise a few of you that even the idea of democracy itself is still being taught. Some might even argue it's under constitutional crisis today. As it relates to humanity over identity, I fundamentally believe that our civil rights are still under fire because far too many of us focus on looking at people, looking how they dress, looking at where they come from, rather than understanding who they are as humans.
All right.
And I believe, if I could say this for just a moment, especially about African Americans or people of color, we have understood the journey all too well. Now reaching a point where we've been on this continent 404 years, since 1619. It was yet 200 years later that we saw the ending of a civil war. I want to go a little further and say it was in 1865 that we saw basically Lee surrender to Grant. The Civil War ended. Abraham Lincoln assassinated. The 13th Amendment ratified, and yet the southern states were still passing what we today call black codes. Even though an Emancipation Proclamation had been delivered and a war had been won, people were still being judged by the color of their skin.
Amen.
And not the content of their character. That's why identity over humanity can get us in trouble. Even after slaves were said to be free, black codes were put in place to hold a group of people back from moving forward. And while black codes may not be in existence today as we knew them back then, whereas we may not see that type of overt racism where there were signs on water fountains, signs in restaurants, I still want you to be aware that I believe that they're genetically coding people, and there are people still yet who have black codes passed to them from generation to generation.
Yes, Lord.
If my wife were here, I'd say, honey, go ahead and get the car started right about now. They need to go ahead and call the pilot and tell them to get ready for takeoff, because y'all not with me yet, but I came to tell the truth. And I realize that too much is at stake. Too many of you have walked and suffered, bled, and died to get up and play games and say things that don't make sense and sound good in one area, make promises, and still yet, as Dr. King talked about, have a check that's still marked insufficient funds.
Yeah. He ain't lying neither. He telling the
So I want to go a little further and say that as we sit here in this beautiful edifice tonight, we have to learn how to put humanity over identity. And when we fail to do so, we find the rights of unarmed people who were stopped for frivolous causes have their rights being taken away. Disproportionate people of color are often incarcerated. We find that strides in the Justice Department from the Obama era continue to get rolled further back. The removal of Section 5 and the need for pre-clearance is still suppressing the vote. The right to vote for some, especially seniors and college students, continues to be hit hard. States like Alabama have polling places that I personally have witnessed have been moved from one place to another in between elections. Some of you might not have heard of the puzzle, Where's Waldo, and the little games, Where's Waldo, but I talked about Where's Waldo as it related even to a DMV ban a few years ago. Instead of allowing people to vote in one particular place or even get registered to vote, they had to chase a van down. That is a form of suppression. That is a form of making sure that people of all colors, people who are struggling to work at 9 to 5 and maybe even a second shift after a first, can't ever find a van and much less can't even vote. And while there's no doubt that we enjoy more registered voters, and while we have more representation in government, more diversity in the workplace, and even more diversity in the halls of Congress, I believe far too many people in the electorate are knowingly and unknowingly engaging in identity politics. And there's a danger in relying on the identity over humanity. It is more frightening when those whose civil liberties and rights have come under fire have been led to believe that she can't or he can't win because of them being a person of color, a female, a disabled veteran, a young millennial, or even an octogenarian. I wish my 80-year-olds would say amen in here tonight. It's sad when people perpetuate the idea that identity excludes us from some areas or aspects of humanity. True or not, our country has been divided for hundreds of years because we still can't view each other as humans. We as a whole haven't learned how to stop using identity as a tool to deny civil rights or as a tool to hinder our progress as Americans. And as foot soldiers tonight, I believe that we can peaceably and non-violently continue to step out, continue to move forward behind the scenes, in churches, in boardrooms, in the steps or halls of government, in buildings, on the street corners, making sure we focus on humanity over identity. But people have the right to practice the guidelines or the tenets of their belief system or lack thereof until it dehumanizes another person. In our democracy, we have the right to choose who we love or choose who we want to hate. But we must choose not to raise kids who want to hate each other. Raising kids to hate is that genetic coding that I talked about earlier, and it leads to the extinction of not just a people, but many people. One of the most horrific things I experienced traveling around the world was when I made it to a certain country, Rwanda, walked through a museum where I actually looked at different skulls that had placards under them stacked behind glass casings. And in those particular casings, you read how a child had a breakfast of oatmeal, but it ended when a machete hit him on the head. And you go back and read the account of the genocide that took place. You don't have to even watch Hotel Rwanda to catch it, but hundreds of thousands of people that look like many of us actually died because somebody came in and started talking about the differences in identity, the bridges of a nose. And as a result, people who look like each other started fighting each other. And I came to tell you one of the dangers of us even identifying with each other and fighting one another based on the color of the complexion of our skin is that we get so divided fighting each other, the enemy continues to run over us. And if we're ever going to see people elected that are going to make a change and a difference, senators like Senator Sanders who are in office, who do great things for our state and our communities, then we have to make sure that we work very hard to make sure we have people in office who don't focus on identity, but humanity. Can somebody just say amen again?
Amen. Amen.
Yet our freedom to choose who we love and who we hate, our freedom to choose where we assemble, the freedom to choose how we worship, must not lead us to believe that just having quotas and diversity hires heals the ills of our society. We should be pushing far beyond diversity and inclusion to pushing towards belonging. Yeah. And you may be AME or AME Zion. You may be Baptist, Catholic, or Protestant, but we should all push towards a belonging. We may have started the foot soldier work 60 years ago, or maybe we just decided to pick up the baton and march 6 days ago, but we're in this together. And when we give that right hand of fellowship, me and pastors like Pastor Johnson on Sunday mornings and the deacons might outstretch their hands, we let people know that when they join, they have the rights and privileges of anybody else who was in the fight a lot longer than they were. We need to welcome some new faces to the fight. We need to welcome some new blood to this warfare. We need to welcome some new people to the front lines and the picket lines and make sure that we're fighting. That's why almost every other Wednesday night, whether you believe it or not, I'm outside with some people who have been on strike for almost 19 to 20 months. People who are living and working in conditions that aren't good have to go to a place that is now what we would call basically a pantry to get their food. We have all types of struggles that I ran all across Alabama in the last few months, over 50,000 miles, arguing about the fact that there are no good septic systems in places like Lowndes County, arguing that we still have problems with people trying to get clean water on Bishop Mountain, arguing that down in Mobile County, they're still dealing with the effects of a mercantile spill, arguing that we don't mind sending money abroad in minutes for the purposes of warfare, but yet we have problems getting money to Flint when they need it in a few days. We have problems when our values don't identify with humanity, but they deal with identity based on your zip code versus based on who you are. That's a person. Y'all get me started up tonight. I can't get down.
That's why you're here.
We may no longer have that moral leader of our nation that we call Dr. King in our midst, who went on to say in history that what took place on that day would be the greatest demonstration of history in the freedom of our nation on August 28, 1963. But today, as moral leaders who picked up his baton and continued to place our feet firmly in the footsteps he's left behind for foot soldiers, I want to remind you that we must continue to push one more time for humanity over identity. But we have to very quickly have a transformation of values. I'm going to speed forward and just say Dr. King talked about the radical revolution of values. And as you did in the 60s, we must rise to the occasion of beating physical force with soul force. Moving from a nation that's thing-oriented to being one that's people-oriented. Moving as you did back in the 60s to continue as foot soldiers to march ahead, not turning back while questioning injustice and lack of fairness in policies. There may not be sundown cities or signs, but we still yet have to recognize before we go to bed and the sun sets every night, we still yet must make plans to rise up the next day because we are still not satisfied. Somebody say, I'm not satisfied.
I'm not satisfied.
I'm not satisfied anywhere as long as there's injustice anywhere. We cannot be satisfied while there are disproportionately victims of brutality and incarceration. We cannot be satisfied when our national values again appear to be taking care of other countries and not taking care of Alabama counties. We cannot be satisfied when our values support the idea of building more prisons in Alabama than bettering the education for our children. We cannot be satisfied as long as there's a dehumanization even in places of incarceration. We cannot be satisfied when our values lead us to draw congressional lines that we know were drawn wrongly, but yet it mutes the voices of people in this building tonight. We cannot be satisfied. We cannot be satisfied when the values within our state have led to people still feeling like they cannot vote or have nothing for which to vote for, as Dr. King talked about. We cannot be satisfied as long as there's evidence of unconscious biases and overt racism. If Dr. King were here tonight, he would argue that we cannot be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like the mighty stream. But I believe moving closer to a level of sustainable satisfaction involves, as I said earlier, the transformation of values. I know you didn't come for a lecture tonight, but I just need to remind the choir, the home team sometime, what this fight is all about. We need a transformation because we are still dealing with shifts in our state. People focusing on self-interest versus the interests of others. And I would get in a whole lot of trouble if I talked about how even our HBCUs and perhaps agricultural and mechanical colleges don't mind taking money from governors that spew out all kinds of rhetoric of interposition and nullification. And we stay quiet when we are getting the money, but we know that we need to make a change. I know I'm not going to get any help in here tonight. We need transformation of values that will result even in our state with its injustice, its oppression, and few people whose lips are still dripping with that very same interposition that I talked about earlier, rising up and truly valuing that all are created equal. But just having freedom or equality is not enough. Dr. King says we don't want freedom with no food to eat or land to cultivate. 4 years after he made that historic speech, he came back and said the dream has been turned into a nightmare. And I know I'm not a pulmonologist nor a cardiologist.
All right.
Just one of those raggedy philosophers, as he called in a preacher. But I came to tell you tonight that instead of just talking about the dream, maybe we need to assess the sleep apnea that is taking place. The nightmare that Dr. King has talked about. The lack of entering into the REM stages where the rapid eye movement occurs and dreams are being seen because we are so fatigued by Shelby B. Holder. We are so fatigued about Merrill. Y'all don't want to talk to me tonight, but whatever is facing our state, we're so fatigued about the legislation not going our way. SCOTUS is still hearing oral arguments about something that should have been settled before the last election. Some of us are fatigued. Can't sleep, can't be rested, can't be restored, and as a result, we can't even march in your steps, foot soldiers.
My God. Good.
We are wearied, waiting on government. Wearied, waiting on civil servants. Wearied, waiting even on the church.
Preach up.
But I believe the changes you made, organizing, recruiting, getting us involved, is helping us to dream again. Thank you so much. Let me wrap it up by saying with the Lord's help, I still believe that progress comes through the people. And I should point out that one can have power, but no progress. And I hate to even go this direction, but this is one of the problems some people say about some of us behind the scenes. That we have the titles and supposedly the power, but the people are still going backwards. Power and no progress. We have powerful positions, but haven't seen progress moving forward. Unnecessary roughness on the field, and no referees willing to blow a whistle. Referees paid off to allow the plays to go the wrong way and Super Bowls to be lost, but I came to tell you there's still yet power in the people. If we agree with Henry David the row who said progress comes from the ingenuity of the people and not from government, then we can't give up and retire now. I talked to somebody tonight who looks like he's younger than me, but he's 71. And say, you can't give up now. Look at him and say, you can't give up now.
You can't get up now.
Tell him he may be the same age, 71 of the year that I was born, 71, but you can't give up now. Can't give up now. The progress we experienced thus far has come from powerful people like each one of you who stood up tonight, not from government, so you can't quit. The progress we experienced thus far has come from foot soldiers in Selma, Montgomery, and most importantly tonight, Birmingham. And I know it's Saturday evening and you're ready to get on with the program, but can I, quote unquote, take you to church for just a minute? Somebody got scared that I was going to tune up a little while. I'm not going there tonight, not going there tonight. Don't do that to me now. Don't do that to me now. Don't do that, don't do that. I can't take you to church. I really do have to catch a plane, but y'all have me before we know it talking about how they laid him in a bar or two on Friday. Lay there all day Saturday. But right, he got up with all power in his hands. And somebody said, he's all right. I don't have a voice to do that tonight. I'm not preaching tonight, but foot soldiers of 63. You might not have as much pep in your step, soul in your stroll, glide in your stride, but stay on the battlefield. I've made up my mind like the old mothers who wear still yet the big hats in the church. I'm going to stay on the battlefield till I die. But in the process of recognizing humanity over identity, I'm going to treat everybody right. And through it all, facing injustice that no longer takes the form that it did in the 60s, I'm going to trust in the Lord until I die. Thank you for the progress you made again. Thank you for organizing, recruiting, getting us involved. Thank you for lifting our voices so that we can lift our voice. Thank you for planting your feet on sacred ground. Thank you tonight for all you continue to do. I close by saying now is the time. Look at somebody say now's the time. Come on, find somebody, two or three people that say now's the time. Now's the time. Not tomorrow, but now's the time. Now is the time for soldiers. 400 years after African Americans arrived here, now is the time. 158 years after the Sixth Civil War has ended, now is the time. 157 years after passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, now is the time. We don't have to wait for another election. Come on, high five somebody and say, now is the time. We don't have to wait for another crisis. Now is the time. We don't have to wait for somebody else to shout, I can't breathe with the knee on their neck. Somebody shout, now is the time. Keep moving forward, foot soldiers. The fight is ours. We won. God bless this great community. God bless this great state.